United States. The Americans, on invading Canada, would occupy most Canadian properties and reduce the Canadiens to the sad condition of slaves. As for myself, I would rather see the country overrun by a horde of vandals.
But Governor Craig is unmoved. He orders Bédard arrested for treasonable practices. His political career is finished. But when war comes, Bédard is proven right about the loyalty of his people. The Canadiens are a conquered people, he writes, but they will show you the path of honor. By 1811, Britain's tactics in her war with France have enraged the United States. British warships are seizing American ships bound for Europe and pressing American seamen into the Royal Navy. In Washington, a political faction called the War Hawks, led by Congressman Henry Clay, is demanding retaliation.
We are invited to submit to debasement, dishonor, and disgrace, to bow the neck to royal insolence. What are we to gain by war has been asked. In reply, I would ask, what are we not to lose by peace?
Britain is too distant to attack directly, but her North American colonies are vulnerable. Thomas Jefferson boasts that taking them will be a mere matter of marching. In Upper Canada, British Major General Isaac Brock prepares for war.
Every American newspaper teems with violent and hostile resolutions against England. And associations are forming in every town for the ostensible purpose of attacking these provinces. I consider the time arrived when every loyal subject should come forward and show his zeal for His Majesty's service.
If the Americans attack, Brock will have the nearly impossible task of defending Upper Canada. It is vulnerable everywhere, but especially at Niagara and along the Detroit frontier. Fortunately for Brock, the Americans have handed him an unexpected ally. The Shawnee chief Tecumseh has no love for the British, but he despises the Americans. On the American frontier, the wave of white settlers pushing west has taken millions of acres of Indian land. Tecumseh has seen both his father and his brother killed by American settlers. Now he sees an opportunity to make a stand.
Where today are the powerful tribes of our people? They have vanished before the greed and oppression of the white man, as snow before the summer sun. Shall we let ourselves be destroyed in our turn without making an effort worthy of our race? Shall we, without a struggle, give up our homes, our lands, the graves of our dead, and everything that we hold dear and sacred? I know you will join with me in saying never. Never.
Tecumseh urges the tribes to join the British, and his support now dramatically changes the odds. Without him, the prospects for Upper Canada seemed bleak. There are just 1,600 British troops here, and many of the civilians are recent American settlers. Isaac Brock knows he cannot depend on their loyalty.
My situation is most critical. Not from anything the enemy can do, but from the disposition of the people. The population, believe me, is essentially bad. A full belief possesses them all that this province must inevitably succumb. Most of the people have lost all confidence. I, however, speak loud and look big.
On the 18th of June, 1812, President James Madison signs the declaration of war against Britain. It begins as a gentleman's war. The news takes a week to reach Isaac Brock. On the night it arrives, the officers of his regiment at Fort George are entertaining a group of American officers from across the border. They insist on finishing the meal as though nothing has changed. Tomorrow, they will be doing their best to kill each other.
Give you honor and duty. Honor and duty.
The immediate threat to Upper Canada in August 1812 is at Fort Detroit. An American army of 2,500 men is poised to invade the province. Removing that threat is Isaac Brock's first objective. Setting out with just 300 men, Brock takes the offensive. It is a bold gamble, but his sheer audacity has an electrifying effect on the Indian tribes. Tecumseh is already waiting at Detroit with his own army of 600 warriors. A Canadian militiaman watches their ritual preparations for war.
It was an extraordinary spectacle. A European, witnessing this for the first time, would have thought he was standing at the entrance to hell, with the gates thrown open to let the damned out for an hour's recreation on earth.
Brock has also recruited 400 Upper Canadian militia. He disguises them in the redcoats of the regular army to bluff the Americans into thinking they're all professional soldiers. At dawn on August the 16th, Brock's mismatched little army marches on the fort of Detroit. They are outnumbered 2-1, but they have one big advantage. The Americans are terrified of the Indians. Tecumseh knows this and openly parades his warriors in full view of the fort. It's all a bluff, but Brock backs it up with a note to the American general.
Sir, it is far from my inclination to join in a war of extermination. But you must be aware that the enormous body of Indians who've attached themselves to my troops will be beyond my control the moment the contest commences.
In other words, expect a massacre. It is what the American general William Hull fears most. While the threat is sinking in, Brock orders his heavy guns to open fire. Lydia Bacon has just arrived in Detroit to join her husband, an American officer.
Fire!
Not for the last time in this war, civilians are caught between the clash of armies.
Never shall I forget my sensation as the cannon began to roar with tenfold fury. I felt as if my nerves would burst and my eyes raised upward to catch a glimpse of the bombshells that were flying in all directions.
For more than 2 hours, the fort is pounded by artillery fire. Brock waits, and the American commander loses his nerve. Standing in the British lines, Private Shadrach Byfield waits for the order to attack that never comes.
After a while, an officer came from the fort with a flag of truce. I was on the advance with General Brock at the time. and from what we could hear, the officer wanted 3-day secession, to which our general replied that if they did not yield in 3 hours, he would blow up every one of them.
Hull surrenders without a fight. An American observer writes to President Madison that the whole fiasco is the most weak, cowardly, and imbecile he's ever seen. Even Lydia Bacon feels disgraced.
The American colors were taken from the staff and replaced by the English colors, and a royal salute fired from the very cannon taken from them in the Revolutionary War.
Lydia and her husband are allowed to return home on the condition he not fight again. Their war is finished. Detroit is a stunning victory for Brock and Tecumseh, one without a single casualty, 2,200 prisoners, and enough captured muskets and cannon to equip an army. Best of all, the news has raised hopes in Upper Canada. The Americans can be beaten. But Brock knows Detroit is a stolen victory, and there is another, far greater contest looming.
You will hear of some decisive action in the course of a fortnight. Or in all probability, we shall return to a state of tranquility. I say decisive because, should I be victorious, I do not imagine the gentry from the other side will be anxious to return to the charge. And if I should be beaten, the province is inevitably gone.
A few miles downstream from the falls, the Niagara River is so narrow, a musket ball can be fired across it. Here, in the fall of 1812, a second American army prepares to avenge the humiliation of Detroit. On the heights of Queenston, the British watch and wait. In the early hours of October 13th, the garrison at Fort George is roused from bed by the thunder of heavy guns. Brock does not wait for his aides, but gallops off alone into the night toward the sound of fighting. He's not sure if this is a feint or the real thing. 7 miles away, the two sides are hurling cannon fire and musket balls across the Niagara River. One young soldier wrote, "The mountains seem to shake beneath the stride of death." On the dark water below, 1,200 American troops are flooding across the river. Brock has his answer. It's a full-scale invasion. At first, the British guns pin down the Americans on the beach below Queenston Heights. Then, by chance, they find a fisherman's path up the steep bank. In a surprise attack, they seize the British cannon. As General Brock arrives, the battle is fast turning in favor of the Americans. At daybreak, he decides on a desperate counterattack. It fails. Now the fate of Upper Canada rests in the hands of a band of 80 Mohawk warriors. They are led by the adopted son of Joseph Brant, a man named John Norton, who is half Cherokee and half Scot.
Comrades and brothers, remember the fame of ancient warriors, whose breasts were never daunted by odds of number. We have found what we came for. There they are. It only remains to fight.
Outnumbered 15-1, Norton's warriors strike and run repeatedly. The Americans stagger and cannot consolidate their position. It is a critical failure. At 2 o'clock, 10 hours after the attack began, British and Canadian reinforcements pour into Queenston. Now 1,000 strong with Norton's warriors on the flank, they break cover and advance.
The whole line opened a fire on us. We rushed forward. From the side of a hill where they lay, they fired again. We came in upon them swiftly. They left their cannon and they ran.
The American commander Winfield Scott surrenders, delivering 925 prisoners. Barely 4 months into the war, 2 American armies have fallen. But the battle has been costly. 12 warriors and 2 Mohawk chiefs were killed. The British and Canadians have lost nearly 100 men. But the Americans suffer far worse. Estimates of their casualties range as high as 500. For the young Canadian militiaman, John Beverly Robinson, the victory is bittersweet.
Thus ended the business of this day. The invasion of our peaceful shores has terminated in the entire destruction of their army and the total loss of everything brought over. Still, we have much to sorrow for.
In that desperate charge at dawn, a sniper had recognized General Brock's uniform. A Canadian volunteer in Brock's regiment saw the shot.
One of them took deliberate aim and fired, and our gallant general fell within a few feet of where I stood. "Are you much hurt, sir?" I inquired. He placed his hand on his breast and made no reply, and slowly sunk down.
Isaac Brock is buried at Fort George as the British cannon fire a 21-gun salute. Across the river, the Americans answer with their own salute. Brock will be remembered as the savior of Upper Canada, a place he didn't much care for and whose people he never trusted. But in that critical first year of the war, he bought the province time and gave it a reason to fight. Tecumseh is recruiting warriors 1,000 miles away when Brock falls at Queenston Heights. By now, the Shawnee chief is known to every tribe from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico. The war has given him an opportunity to realize a vision. A unified and independent Indian Confederacy powerful enough to resist American expansion. A nation within a nation.
The whites have driven us from the sea to the lakes. We can go no farther. Unless every tribe unanimously combines to give a check to the ambition and avarice of the whites, they will soon conquer us apart and disunited, and we will be driven from our native country and scattered as autumn leaves before the wind.
To American leaders intent on expanding settlement, Tecumseh is a dangerous man. Indiana Governor William Henry Harrison both fears and admires him.
The implicit obedience and respect which the followers of Tecumseh pay to him bespeaks him one of those uncommon geniuses which spring up occasionally to produce revolutions.
Tecumseh has emerged as one of the most powerful Indian leaders on the continent. As the war enters its second year, he has demonstrated his courage and skill in half a dozen battles. But in September of 1813, Tecumseh can only listen to a faraway battle and wait. Out on Lake Erie, the sound of warships carries for 30 miles. The American and British fleets are in the midst of a battle that will change the course of the war. An Englishman had once sneered that the American Navy was nothing but a few frigates manned by a handful of bastards and outlaws. But today, they are good enough. When it is over, the Americans have command of Lake Erie. Tecumseh knows what will come next. His old enemy, William Henry Harrison, is waiting with an invasion force of 5,000 men. Tecumseh looks forward to the fight. But his allies have other ideas. Now that they have lost control of the lake, the British fear they can be cut off and trapped on the Detroit frontier. So they choose retreat. Fort Detroit, which Tecumseh and Brock had captured a year earlier, is abandoned. In a rage, Tecumseh confronts the British general, Henry Proctor, and accuses him of cowardice.
We must compare our father's conduct to that of a fat dog that carries his tail on his back, but when frightened, he drops it between his legs and runs off. We wish to remain here and fight our enemy. You have got the arms and ammunition. If you intend to retreat, give them to us, and you may go. Our lives are in the hands of the Great Spirit. We are determined to defend our lands, and if it be His will, we wish to leave our bones upon them.
Proctor is unmoved. The British will pull back up the Thames River, all the way to York if necessary. It is an agonizingly slow retreat. For a week, Harrison's army chases them down, gaining every day. By the time General Proctor finally turns to make a stand at Moraviantown, the Redcoats and Tecumseh's warriors are exhausted and disheartened. Most have not eaten in more than 2 days. They have only a single cannon and not much ammunition, and they are outnumbered 2 to 1. The Americans mount a cavalry charge. For the Redcoats and Private Shadrach Byfield, veteran of Detroit and Queenston Heights, the battle is over in less than 10 minutes.
After exchanging a few shots, our men gave way. One of our sergeants exclaimed, "For God's sake, men, stand and fight!" I stood by him and fired one shot, but the line was broken and the men were retreating. I then made my escape into the wood.
General Proctor fled for safety as soon as the fighting started. Leaving his men to be captured or killed. On the right flank, Tecumseh and a few hundred warriors, now hopelessly outnumbered, fight on for another hour. Then, the sound of Tecumseh's voice, which all had heard urging on the fight, is gone. It is not certain who killed Tecumseh or what happened to his body. Some believe his warriors carried him from the field as they retreated. Others claim the body was left to American souvenir hunters who took his clothing and tore off strips of skin for razor strops. What is certain is that wherever he lies, there is nothing to mark the place.
The Great Barrier was broken. It was my last fight. My heart was very big then. Tecumseh filled it. It has been empty ever since.
Tecumseh's army has been broken. Never again will the military services of the Indians regain their importance in colonial affairs. Tecumseh's dream of a pan-Indian confederacy dies with him. In the fall of 1813, the Americans hold the western frontier of Upper Canada. But they now face the simple truth that no army can conquer Canada without taking Quebec. The Canadiens have always known that sooner or later they will come. It is an improbable army that digs in the defenses on the banks of the Chateauguay River to face the invaders. French Canadians standing shoulder to shoulder with the British. Louis Guy and David Johnson. Michael O'Sullivan and Joseph-Marie Lontin. Daly and Brugière. They are led by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Michel de Salaberry, a man whose grandfather fought against the British and whose father fought for them. Now French and British will face a common enemy. The American strategy is a classic pincer move. One force will march north along the Chateauguay River, while a second comes down the St. Lawrence. When they meet, Montreal will fall. De Salaberry's voltigeurs and the Canadian militia are chosen to make a stand on the banks of the Chateauguay.
Colonel de Salaberry selected a strong position, and we began to fortify ourselves with trees and to form entrenchments. Behind these works, we lay for 3 days and 3 nights, waiting for the enemy.